Dear friends, we join together this afternoon with heavy hearts and agitated spirits to mourn, to remember, and ultimately to celebrate our beloved Nancy Klein, who was friend, confidant, teacher, and mentor to many, and to many of us. We knew she was ailing, as Lou devotedly and unceasingly spent hours at her bedside daily, and then nightly as well, spared only by Audrey's loving presence. We also learned how gravely ill she became. Nevertheless, it is hard to imagine our world without her bold, honest, straightforward, and compassionate presence. Every Tuesday morning, with the women of Fairmont Temple's sewing and knitting group, she was exceedingly devoted to her fellow designers and to the work of creating dolls for children in underprivileged areas of our city. She was such a perfectionist that she would sometimes take home parts of the dolls to finish them properly at home. The only time she set the dolls aside, I am told, is when she was frantically trying to finish a dress for her beloved granddaughter, Nora's first birthday, which Lou personally delivered, if I am not mistaken. Nancy loved Lou. She adored and was exceedingly proud of Audrey and joyously embraced Joshua. But in the final year of her life, Nora was sun, moon, and stars to her. There's a wonderfully evocative saying in our tradition, Kishem came he. As her name, so is she. Nancy's Hebrew name was Nechana Esther. Nechana from chen, which means grace or favor, or denotes anything that induces a favorable response, or something to which we find ourselves drawn. Even as Nancy graced our lives with her sharp intelligence, her high standards, her love of the theater and the arts, her unwavering loyalty to family, faith, and friends, her intellectual honesty and fearless expression of viewpoint and attitudes. Nancy was also an Esther, whose regal sensibilities touched us all with kindness and nobility. She was ever conscious of the distinguished heritage that had been bequeathed to her and that she entrusted to Audrey and now to Nora. Nancy was part and progenitor of an impressive line of strong, capable, and accomplished women. Our hearts go out to Audrey, Joshua, and Nora, whose grandmother must continue to live for her in the stories, memories, and anecdotes we share with her, and especially to Lou, her partner and companion in all things. I remember seeing Nancy proudly sitting in our sanctuary whenever the choir sang, so many of whose members are here today. I am quite sure she listened especially for Lou's voice, perhaps even singing the words of Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and of earth. Esainai el harim me'ayin yavo ezri. Esainai el harim me'ayin me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai ose shamayim varetz. Ezri me'im Adonai ose shamayim varetz. Esainai el Harim me'ayin Yavo Ezri.
The sage Ecclesiastes wrote, "The eye never has its fill of seeing. Young or old, those who depart this life never see enough of the world, never complete a task, never cherish loved ones enough before they are called home. Oh, how they yearn for yet another respite from the final summons. And we yearn to have them continually close to us, for yet another challenge in our lives, another joy, another precious moment. God be now with those whose hearts are broken. Be with Nancy's family, as parting has come too soon. Console us all at this hour. Be near to us when light seems distant. Sustain us, O God, until the time of healing." Rabbi John Lewis Aaron wrote, "When will I be myself again? Some Tuesday, perhaps, in the afternoon, sitting quietly with a cup of tea and a cookie. Or Wednesday, same time or later, you'll stir from a nap and see her. You'll pick up the phone to call her. You'll hear her wise, unexpected advice. And you will not be frightened. And you will not be sad. And you will not be alone. You will not be alone. Not alone at all. Your tears will warm you. But not today. And not tomorrow. But someday, perhaps a Tuesday, late in the afternoon, with a cup of tea and a cookie, then you will feel yourself again." Amen. Dear friends, your presence here today is such a healing tonic to a family that has sustained a very deep wound. You should only know how much your presence, your love, your affection, your voices, consolation, your presence just means so much. Klein family wishes that I should acknowledge that after our service here at Berkowitz-Kumin-Bookatz, we will continue with a service of interment at Mayfield Cemetery, after which the family invites you to join them up until 9 p.m. today at Lander Haven. When we arrive at Lander Haven, shortly after we arrive there with the family, we will share some memorial prayers and light the memorial candle. This evening at 7 p.m., Cantor Sager will lead a memorial service. Tomorrow, the family invites you, if you wish, to join them at the family's residence at 22361 Westchester Road in Shaker Heights. You all know the place. From 3 to 9 tomorrow. Our colleague Cantor Lappin will again lead memorial prayers tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. at the Klein residence. They invite you, if you wish, to honor Nancy's memory, to do so with a contribution of generosity, of tzedakah of some kind, to a charity of your choice. They suggest a place some of us are familiar with called Anshe Chesed Fairmont Temple. We'd be grateful. And Nancy's name is a blessing to our temple. Friends, there is a famous gravestone in Boston from the late 18th century, recalling a woman named Anne Barbara Bender. Her epitaph reads, "While weeping friends bend over this silent tomb, they recount her virtues and their loss deplore. Faith's piercing eyes dart through dreary gloom and hail her blessed, where tears shall flow no more." Tears flow no more. Hail her best, where tears flow no more. I hear those two phrases as though they are clapping against one another, like two hands, signaling to one another, indicating it will be around to see future hope and destiny, while the other hand reminds that it is still wet with tears from sorrow. Acceptance that the person who has died can no longer emit tears. I decided to read aloud these historically meaningful words because I believe they bring to mind the sweet spirit of Nancy Klein's life. We gather with her weeping friends and family, and we remember a person of great substance, intellect, measure, grace, talent, and creativity. We remember on purpose today Nancy as someone fully alive. Life. One who gave life with her human energies. This was a driven person, an expressive woman who'd call out with us and laughed with us, who would at our Fairmont Temple pray with us and bake with us and perform acts of loving kindness with us. We had hoped that like so many times before, Nancy would stage a comeback. In recent weeks, his illness caused such wreckage to her system. The once expressive Nancy turned inward to virtues of thoughtfulness, intensity, and her sense of reckoning, that there might not be any comeback left in her. But today, just a couple of days after her death, having begun to prepare ourselves to recount her virtues and hail the blessings she celebrated with us, I believe we can draw comfort from the fact that there is nothing left that can diminish her either. Nancy is now in the place where our hands meet and hold to express tenderness. She is in the sounds of our hands clapping reflexively at something just so funny or something so shrewd that has been shared with her. Nancy Klein can no longer be weakened. Today, we aim to rebuild her word for word. Her way of speaking, honest, unvarnished, candid, unencumbered by the mortality that hovered near to her so early in her life. As participants in these Jewish rites and rituals, we turn to what our tradition calls Yotzer Or Uvarei Choshech, the one who forms light and must also create darkness. We pray that God will light a path forward for Nancy's beautiful one-year-old grandchild, Nora, to see. I only met Nora for the first time on Friday. Oh my God, she's cute. As the family gathers for Shiva later, you'll see she's been planning to wear a dress, the one that Cantor acknowledged, with Lou delivering, made with her own hands. I'm warning you in advance, this kid's precious. But her name means reverence and awe, which is just what Nancy held on to. She held on to that sense of reverence and awe for new life, one health setback after another. In the too narrow span of the time Nora and Nancy could physically snuggle up with one another, I know that Lou, Nancy, Audrey, and Josh, they each hoped that in those times, the things that Nancy held reverence for, the traits of human courage and resilience, the fierce independence and vision, the desire to have one's mind be moved, that these things too would transmit from generation to generation. L'Ador Vador. We grieve today with you, Lou, and our hearts ache with yours. In a few moments, I know you'll talk to us about your gratitude, that your life's energies combined and colluded with Nancy's, conspiring to make meaning, hope, faith, goodness, laughter, and eccentricity. Signature moves in their Shaker Heights home. Wherever Lou and Nancy traveled, volunteered, explored at one another's side, all of those traits follow. We remember Nancy so happily by the side of her richly loved and adored daughter, Audrey. Perhaps I'm the only one, but did Nancy and Lou ever tell you that their daughter became an ordained cantor? A bright and learned and affirming sweet singer of Israel. In case you've forgotten, look back in your email several years ago to a Boston Globe article that Nancy sent us all, featuring Audrey's aspirations and route to her ordination as a spiritual leader. At least in my case, it was one of those emails where the sender forgets to make everyone else blind copy. So for the following several days, every recipient is treated to the hundreds of Mazel Tov emails, prayerful and pleased affirmations. The phrase Mazel Tov is actually an astrological wish. It refers to bright and hopeful constellations. It's a way of saying, well, colloquially, it means congratulations, but it's a way of saying, may the stars shine brightly for you. Audrey, that is exactly what happened for your mom from February 23rd, 1985 onward. You lit up the sky for her. You gave Nancy such starlit hope about the path that would bless her and your dad and your extended family. I know that you will pay tribute as well to your mom today with personal reflections, lessons she taught you as a mom, and as another bestie in your life, someone who'd call you for no particular reason, or you'd call her, only to find out that she was glad you called because she was just going to call you. We know you miss her profoundly. And as your community, we pledge to circle you with compassion and space you will need to process this loss. As I look around this gathering and I'm moved by your presence, I know that we in the community at funerals today, to the people who could be present with us and those who are here physically and those who are here virtually through live streaming. But in Nancy's case, I feel as if there's a whole array of diverse others who are not streaming, but who are in a way virtually with us, because their path intersected with that of Nancy Weiss Klein. She may have been their colleague or student at CSU or Case, where between 1989 and concluding around 2006, Nancy's fine leadership and scholarship as an instructor in theater graced so many talented and inquisitive hearts. I've known Nancy for the last 14 years of her life, and I can tell you within our temple and within our wider Jewish and Shaker Heights communities, this woman did not keep her ideas about the world and the way it should work locked up. Nancy was open, sometimes more open than you expected her to be, about everything. She hid nothing. I picture her in the center of our atrium foyer at Fairmont Temple, where for decades, varying generations of human beings have sat at her side, knitting or sewing, making dolls, to make kindness happen for people in need. That group is one Lou refers to as the Hello Dolly volunteers. They remember the celebrated stories Nancy would tell about the things she'd experienced. She was not raised as a child in a home where Jewish culture and connection were observed with great enthusiasm. No, she married into that mob. She began reluctantly, but then it was as though she raised herself as a Jewish adult. And as experiences affected her, that spoke to her instinct to make the world a better place or a more safe and equitable environment for her daughter and now her granddaughter, that was where she sought Jewish knowledge to back her play. In all of her endeavors and in the values she shared with you, Lou, Nancy drank in the wisdom not only contained within Jewish history books, but in the making of modern Jewish history, making strides the generations before her in the Weiss and in your Klein family might never have imagined. I remember last spring when we prepared a temple to gather and celebrate Cantor Saker's remarkable path-breaking career, how Nancy reminisced with me on one of the Shabbatot before that of all the eras in which women have brought scholarship and skill and seen to it that women belonged in the room where it happens at every major stakeholder decision in Jewish life. That was something that previous generations could never have conceived. She was indeed proud to know that you, Sarah, had helped convey throughout Audrey's life, and especially together with her, that there should be no obstacle between her and her dreams to become a cantor or to aspire to any achievement in the universe. Nancy was born on October 12, 1952, the older of the two children of Herb and Lois Weiss, older sister to Kevin, who I believe died less than a year ago. Much closer to her father than her mom, Nancy similarly became very close with Herb's parents, and especially bonded with her grandmother Jenny, who taught her to cook and made many loving bonds with her granddaughter. There are special earrings that belong to Nancy's grandma Jenny that Nancy was eager to make important to Audrey, and, well, that worked. It's a mitzvah, an act of great sacred intention and significance to Audrey to have been wearing those earrings from her great-grandmother, passed from her mom when Nora was born last May, and even as she's been here at her mom's side, traveling from Toronto and back. But great-grandma Jenny's son, Herb, Nancy's dad, was like Lou, an admired psychiatrist in the community who ultimately specialized in geropsychiatry. In the earliest years of her life, Nancy lived with her folks in an apartment on Superior at University Heights, not far from here. But the majority of her years as a child, and for her brother Kevin, would be in Shaker Heights, at the Weiss home on South Woodland. She would go to Mercer, and then Byron, and then Shaker Heights High School. Badges of honor that Audrey was glad turned out to also bless her path in learning. Audrey says she had fantastic teachers who encouraged her in Shaker schools and also at Northwestern, where she'd go to undergrad, which was where Nancy went to graduate school. Finding beauty in things that expressed artful creativity or elegance, such as fine china or jewelry or silver or ceramic teacups with which to enjoy an afternoon tea, these were very special to Nancy. Lou remembers her cherishing a Tiffany necklace he gave to her at the time of their wedding. Lou also shared with me something I didn't know, other than in her love of Shakespearean literature, which is that Nancy loved to dish and deliver insight and information, perhaps even a little gossip, about all things British, especially the British royal family. These recent couple of years, there's been a little drama in the royal family. Those royals are worthy of a theater professor's attention. But to Nancy, these paled in comparison to the spectacle of royal beauty, dazzling and buzzing within her spirit, while watching the recent coronation of the king, or in the exquisite sense of self-sacrifice that was eulogized at the legacy of the late Queen at her recent funeral. That Lou and Nancy were able to connect over the details spilling out of the royal family for decades, not counting the relatively brief time of their courtship and living together, followed by engagement, was something special to her. She counted it as a blessing. Nancy met her Lou at a party in 1980, hosted by a friend of Nancy's in Chicago, with whom she had gone to Wash U in St. Louis as an undergrad. Lou had met that same mutual friend at a synagogue in Chicago, and while pursuing his second medical residency there, He says about Nancy that he was drawn to her because something inside him told him this woman was very different than anyone he had previously dated. Several days later, he took her to dinner at a Korean restaurant. The food was, shall we say, not a positive experience. But the memorable, rich conversations that began that night lasted for 41 years. Her beautiful presence, outlook, and intellect were and are always a blessing to Lou. Though she'd have been glad to elope, Lou was wanting a formal Jewish wedding. Rabbi Applebaum from Lou's synagogue in Akron would come out of retirement to visit their then Cleveland synagogue, Brith Emeth, and conduct the wedding for Lou and Nancy. And in their marriage, they'd kibitz and they'd play. Occasionally, they would disagree and bicker. They'd dream and dare one another to get bigger and better achievements. Lou compares their marriage's unique dynamic to one that played out on TV screens in Norman Lear's famous All in the Family spinoff, where appliance store owner Walter Findlay plays the fourth husband to Edith Bunker's outspoken liberal dynamic force to be reckoned with, Cousin Maud, so memorably played by actress Bea Arthur. And just as Walter and Maud in the TV universe knew that their disagreements were just part of what worked for them, Lou knew there was only one for him. His beloved Nancy, who, like Maud, would neither tolerate nor give out any BS, and whose loyalty and devotion unsentimentally knew no bounds. In their home, they appreciated one another, alongside fine music and literature, beautiful values that have been part of Jewish culture, and others from the world of Sondheim's lyrics on Broadway. Nancy's son-in-law Josh met Nancy for the first time during the High Holy Days in 2011. At that time, Audrey was singing within the ensemble of musicians at Beth Emmet Synagogue in Evanston, Illinois. He recalls the dinner they went to at a place called the Lucky Platter. That's no surprise, because for Josh, this was a memorable and lucky turn of events that night. As Nancy did exactly as she intended, she conveyed in meeting the man who would ultimately be the one to whom Audrey would commit her heart and soul. She came there with her astonishing, playful, and boisterous presence. Josh remembers his mother-in-law's cheeky sense of humor, the way she began to include him on what were previously just inside jokes between Nancy and Audrey. Josh self-describes to me, "I don't love everyone, but when I love hard." And Josh adored Nancy. He was so appreciative of her that when he made this confession, it reminded me of the special vantage point that I had shared with Cantor Sager a few years ago at Josh and Audrey's wedding on our bima in the Mandel Sanctuary at Fairmount Temple. You could tell that afternoon that two incredible partners were beginning a new family, but you could also see clear as day the affection and goodness that he held for his mother-in-law's blend of irreverence and straight talk, even as they shared together the traditional rituals of a wedding. It somehow was more honest and holy, just as she intended it. Every friend of the Klein family gathered to celebrate at that wedding could see how grateful she was that someone so special as Josh had become an adored part of the family. This would, among other things, help Audrey bring about the incredible gift in the world of a grandchild, dear Nora. You're good for a lot of things, Josh, but she's really grateful for that. To see a friend celebrate such happy celebrations like these, alongside the tsuris that had been her declining health and the narrowness and the loneliness of the pandemic, it's a rare privilege. As one of the friends and one of the clergy to this family, I could see how much Nancy found such happiness in the wide and diverse reservoir of friends who'd gather with them whenever we'd celebrate Shabbat, and especially when Lou and Nancy would mark a milestone anniversary, a birthday. This moment I add some comments shared with me this morning by our colleague and teacher, Rabbi Josh Caruso. who writes from out of town how brokenhearted he is at the passing of Nancy Klein. He says, "Please know that even as I am out of town this weekend, I am holding you in my heart, sending prayers of healing. In the last few weeks, I got to visit Nancy at the hospital as she bravely faced the most difficult circumstances. When I sat with her on Memorial Day weekend, Nancy reflected on her life, most of all the memories that marked her days. She talked about her love of teaching, her enduring marriage to Lou, Tuesday mornings at Fairmount Temple with the sewing ladies, the pride she took in Audrey's accomplishments, including the joy she found in the extraordinary relationship she fostered with her daughter through the years. It was not long ago when Josh and Audrey were standing under the chuppah of our Mandel sanctuary, our clergy team remarking afterwards how extraordinary that wedding was. The unparalleled joy of witnessing a child of the congregation reach that moment in life. It was certainly a special day for Lou and Nancy, in part because they knew their daughter was marrying such an exceptional partner in Josh. I still can recall how beautiful Nancy looked that day, how she beamed brightly, the incomparable mother-daughter moments that took place before, during, and after the wedding remained with Nancy until her final breaths. In these last few years, Rabbi Caruso writes, Nancy faced medical hurdles and setbacks. We marveled at her resilience to move ahead and to keep going on. Importantly, since Nora's birth, Nancy would gush about that little beauty up in Toronto, who she could not get enough of. She relished the several times she got to see her and even got to sew that dress for her granddaughter, the hem of which Audrey finished when Nancy no longer could. The picture of Nora in that dress, sitting perched on a dresser with an eye shot of Nancy, sat in her hospital room and brought her to life during the last and difficult days. In my last visit to see her, feeling more resigned than ever that her days were short, Nancy acknowledged the pain she felt, knowing she would not witness Nora's milestones to come. But she also expressed comfort in the recognition that she taught Audrey well and knew that her precious Nora was in the best hands of a loving mother and father to nurture her growth. Audrey, Josh, and Lou will continue to ensure that Nora will always know her grandmother, her stories, her memories, in the photos from recent years, and in the knowledge that her grandmother is good, kind, and loving, a person worthy of emulating. Let us remember her for blessing. May her memory endure. Dear friends, we now come to that part of our service where we just acknowledge that we are praying that a sweet and merciful and compassionate source of blessing in the universe has relieved Nancy of her suffering and taken her, just her physical nearness from our midst. But we should be gathering today with a buoyant purpose. We are here to raise our voice and shout aloud to the source of life itself with gratitude for her good life, her rich values. Her name is worth weeping at a gravestone, hailing all for which she was blessed. We come together as Nancy, Lou, and Audrey, and Josh and Nora's friends and neighbors and loved ones, pledging not to forget what she stood for and what she would not stand for, and inevitably the vulnerabilities that are found in every existence. Nancy didn't hide those things, at least not on purpose. So let's try and learn from that. Let us show kindness and generosity to one another, patience, and speak the truth in our hearts. And in all of our endeavors, may we receive help from one another and from God. Be with us, God. Hear us. Remember the difficult journey Nancy took through her life. Help us remember how she delivered her life's message poignantly, thoughtfully, with no BS. Not even a minute. Amen.
Shalom Rav HaYisrael Amcha לעולם שלום רב ישראל עמך תשים לעולם כי אתה הוא מלך אדון לכל השלום וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. ברוך אתה אדוני עושה השלום. We call on Lou to share his thoughts and reflections.
Props. This room is full. Thank you, everyone here, live today, and more watching live stream from wherever. Thank you. Thank you for honoring the memory of my wife, Nancy. I hope I can complete my remarks today, but if I can't, you'll have to think of me like Schubert's Unfinished Symphony. Please allow me some possible moments for emotional reconstitution, if need be. When I think of so many of you, I think of how Nancy must have touched your lives in some way, and it's already even been mentioned. Ironically, this theme of touching others was initiated by Nancy herself just last weekend. Audrey had just arrived back in Cleveland from Toronto, and as the two of us sat by Nancy's hospital bedside, she said to us, unsolicited by us, and with a weakening voice and alertness, "You know, I've touched many lives." Audrey and I looked at each other, dumbfounded. Nancy was not one to call attention to herself, and through her life had some self-image issues. Who doesn't? But Audrey and I both praised her for what we agreed was true for her and should be for each of us. We all touch many people through our lives, but we don't always stop to think about it or acknowledge it to others. It is not an egotistical thing to do, but it's usually not considered socially appropriate to say how great it is I've touched people. This admission on Nancy's part reminded me of her professional calling. She was a teacher, and probably her most grateful student was her life partner, me. Over the past several weeks, as I sat by her bedside, and at times when sleep allowed her a break from her discomfort, I thought back to the beginning of our nearly 43-year relationship. Nancy and I met accidentally at a party in Chicago, just 3 months after I got there to start my training in psychiatry. Although she was dressed very elegantly, her dear friend Mary had apparently helped her pick what to wear, as Nancy was ambivalent about even going to the party. I think I was attracted not just to her elegance, but also to her interest in talking with me. I literally sat at her feet at the party, telling her all about training to become a psychiatrist, as if she'd be so impressed. She wasn't. She didn't tell me until a short time later, like next week, that she was the daughter of one of Cleveland's leading psychiatrists and psychoanalysts. Then she told me she never did anything her mother told her to do, which included, "Don't marry a psychiatrist, you'll be sorry." So I thought, oh great, she wants to get involved with me just to spite her mother. To add to that, she didn't want to get up. I'm talking about Nancy now. She didn't want to get up early with me to work out at my nearby health club in Lincoln Park, or to go running or bike riding, all my favorite pastimes. She didn't want to go to temple with me at least once in a while. In fact, I learned from her that she spent Yom Kippur each year cleaning out her closet. Cleaning out her closet, Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. The rest of us spend that day cleaning out our spiritual closets, while she spends it doing something mundane like literal cleaning. Fast forward to 3 months later after we met. We come back here to Ohio. She was from Cleveland, I'm from Akron. So our parents got to meet. Nancy's father, Dr. Herb Weiss, and my mom got along, but I thought, he's a shrink. He can get along with anybody, even with Goldie, my mother. But our mothers, double oi. How can I get involved with a woman if our mothers don't get along? But to help matters further, my mother and Nancy didn't get along. Fast forward now to year 2. Nancy and I decided to try living together just to see if we could survive that phase of our relationship. I was contemplating applying to psychoanalytic school. For that, you have to go through your own psychoanalysis with a senior or training analyst. I was going to wait to start mine until when most student analysts start theirs, shortly after starting coursework. Nancy said to me, if you don't start your analysis as soon as possible, this relationship is over. I knew she meant it. I realized she was right. Women love it when the man says you're right and he means it. I realized she loves me enough that she wants to keep me, but I had to make some changes for this to work. It was from this point that we each made changes for this to work. She started appreciating my love for music from the Romantic period and first half of the 20th century, especially Gershwin. I started appreciating her love of music from the earlier classic period, and we picked our concerts accordingly. While she had still lived up in Evanston near her graduate program at Northwestern, we used to go on dates where she'd find me a piano studio room at the music school, and I'd entertain her with what I could still play, in those days, can't do it anymore, including some difficult pieces like Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. I didn't play the whole thing, but what I could handle, and whatever else I played. And I'd entertain her, I already said that, and show tunes by our favorite playwright and composer, Stephen Sondheim. In fact, over our years together, we often communicated with each other by singing lyrics appropriate to the moment. Nothing's gonna harm you, not while I'm around. What, leave you? How could I leave you? Tragedy tomorrow, comedy tonight. That's the hard one this weekend. It's not tomorrow. Or tonight. It's now. It's moment to moment. It's not tragedy or comedy. It's both. They're merged. It's tragicomedy, and it applies to each of us. But I'd like to leave tragedy and return to comedy for a moment in the woods. Thank you, Stephen. Nancy taught me a lot, and we had many discussions that reflected our respective intellects. By the way, I hold myself responsible for her not completing her PhD in theater. She had said that she couldn't do both, marry me and complete her doctorate. Oh well, we both benefited by that decision, even Nancy. I taught her something for which we both became grateful. I taught her to be a practicing Jew, in a fashion with which we were both comfortable. She didn't enjoy going to the temple I had joined in Chicago before I met her, but she very much has enjoyed our 35 years with Fairmount Temple here in Cleveland, which we picked together. She had gotten quite involved with its sisterhood, now called the Women of Fairmount Temple, and she helped develop a project, which Rabbi has already referred to, where the women made dolls and the various outfits for those dolls aimed for special needs children. Nancy was very mixed about my joining the Fairmount Temple Choir back in Y2K. Oh my goodness. She said, now I don't have anyone to sit next to who I know during the High Holy Day services. So the compromise on that one was Nancy was adopted as the choir mascot, which meant she could come back to the choir room whenever she wanted, and she generally made a beeline there once the service ended. She made many friends in the choir, and in a way she had her own relationship with you that really didn't include me. 4 of those choir members have honored Nancy's memory today by singing the last line of the concluding prayer at the graveside following our service there later. Nancy's talents in sewing, switching to another topic, had led her earlier to a brief stint in the costume shop at the Cleveland Playhouse. But her last sewing project, as Rabbi Ed also mentioned, was for our living doll, our granddaughter Nora, for whom Nancy made a dress for her first birthday party. The party was just 4 weeks ago today, a party Nancy couldn't attend because her final illness had started. But I was able to bring the dress to Toronto, which Nora wore that day, and which she will wear when she arrives at Lander Haven later this afternoon. The irony of it all, Nancy entered our relationship as a non-practicing Jew and ended up raising a daughter who started in her mother's footsteps, and then the theater world, and then changed course and became an ordained cantor. Doesn't God work in strange ways, or as we say in Yiddish, it was beschert. It was meant to be. I want to conclude. Am I doing okay on time? I know we like to watch how long. I want to conclude with a dream, my dream, or sort of dream, a mini dream that I had just 2 nights ago while at Temple for Shabbat service. Don't worry, it wasn't during your sermon. In the dream, Nancy and I are riding on a bus. We're the only passengers. I'm not even sure there was even a bus driver. Somehow, I knew in the dream it was the number 151 bus that all Chicagoans know runs up and down Sheridan Road and Lakeshore Drive to get you to Michigan Avenue and the Loop. Nancy and I rode it many times. Although I knew it was the 151, it was solid white outside. Unexpectedly, Nancy said to me in a quite unemotional, robotic tone, "This is where I get off." Remember, I need moments. Windshield wipers. I replied, "How do you know this is your stop?" She replied, "I don't know, but this is where I get off." She stepped down the 3 steps leading to the door of the bus, turned her head to face me, and she winked. She winked at me and then said with a brief smile, "It's been fun, Louie. Thanks. I'll see you later." And she left the bus and the door closed. I think some of the symbolism in my dream is quite obvious to most of you, but I will do what all people schooled in the process of psychoanalysis do. We associate to the dream. Although I lived my first year that I was in Chicago within view of Lakeshore Drive and rode the 151 many times, my association in the dream is that the host of the party where we met lived on Sheridan Road, and had I not walked to and from the party, I would have taken the 151. The reference to having fun. We were known to 2 of our friends here today as the Bickersons. Nancy and I had our moments of bickering and even yelling, but we always knew we were together in this for life. We would jokingly tell others and ourselves, "We'll never get divorced because we'll murder each other first." We weren't quite as bad as George and Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Nancy's closing farewell, "See you later," was actually something I saw on the grave of movie actor Rod Steiger when I visited Forest Lawn in Los Angeles a few years ago. I was touched by that epitaph, and it obviously has stayed with me. And finally, I noticed what she was wearing in the dream. The dress she wore to the party that night in 1980. So, in conclusion, it's been fun, Nancy. Thanks. I'll see you later, baby. I can use any help I can get. Getting old ain't easy.
As Nancy would say, one must stop and smell the roses. It is purely a nice coincidence that my dad's favorite psalm and my mom's favorite Shakespearean sonnet happen to be number 30 in their respective canons. While there is absolutely no connection between them, both texts speak to the duality of grief, of holding space for both sadness and gladness. Psalm 30 has given hope to so many in times of trouble and anguish. For as long as I can remember, one verse in particular has always stuck out to my dad, a verse he has often shared with my mom and I. Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy cometh in the morning. During this last month, and especially in the last few days, I have thought of this verse often, dreading the moment when she would take her last breath, but knowing that every long-winded story she ever told me, every piece of useless, her word, not mine, knowledge she ever imparted upon me, every recipe she ever passed down to me, every cup of tea we ever shared together would always be a source of joy and comfort when I am missing her. As so many of you know, my mom was a woman of many talents and many, many opinions. As a scholar, creator, and patron of the theater, she knew what made a play work and could give you a lecture, analysis, or review of every production she ever worked on, every script she ever read, and every play, musical, ballet, or opera she ever saw. She was also very vocal about what she considered to be good theater. My sincerest apologies if Nancy ever poo-pooed a show you wrote, performed in, or just really loved. It happened to the best of us, myself included. But teaching and talking theater is what excited her the most in life, her true calling. As a sewer, my mom could make anything, from an intricate bodice or doublet and hose for a Jacobean revenge tragedy, to the many, many Halloween costumes she made for me, for my friends, and most recently for Nora, who went as a hamburger this past November. I knew she was so excited to make something for Nora's first Halloween, and when I called her in the early autumn to discuss what Josh and I had decided upon, her reaction was, "A hamburger? Of all the things I can make, that's what you want? Don't you want something prettier?" I stood my ground and said no, we wanted a hamburger. For context, Joni, our dog, already had a hot dog costume, so a hamburger for Nora was a natural choice. And yes, I went as ketchup and Josh went as mustard. Well, believe you me, that costume was the prettiest damn hamburger costume ever created. As has been alluded to several times already, for over 10 years, she put her needle and thread to good use through the Women of Fairmount Temple Doll Project, dubbed Hello Dolly by my father. The Dolly ladies, including my mom's dear friend Stephanie Klein, no relation, it's Klein spelled the other way, met every Tuesday morning to make dolls for Project ACT, which provides resources and support for children in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District who are residing in temporary emergency shelters or transitional housing. Every stitch of every doll my mom's hand touched was sewn with precision, in part because Nancy was a bit of a perfectionist, but mostly because even though she never met any of the recipients, she deeply cared for and valued each child who would be receiving what she had created. She once said to me on the phone after working for hours at her sewing table in the basement, "You can't half-ass a mitzvah. If you're going to do a good deed for someone else, do it right and do it beautifully, because every person deserves dignity." Though she desperately tried to get me more interested in sewing when I was younger, one of my greatest regrets is not learning how to sew beyond basic hand stitching. During her last days, she insisted that I take her sewing machine. And when I reminded her that I don't know how to use it, she said, "So you'll learn. Stephanie will teach you." Stephanie, I'm sorry that Nancy has volunteered you, and I guess some Zoom sewing lessons will be in order at some point down the road. As a cook and baker, my mom showed her love through food, a skill unlike sewing I have embraced with gusto. The kitchen was her domain, and some of my fondest memories are at the kitchen counter, standing next to her as we chopped vegetables for chicken soup, as we baked dozens and dozens of cookies for the staff at Lutheran Hospital around the holidays, and as we weighed and measured all of the cake layers for my 7th grade science fair project about the chemistry of cake baking, which was, of course, titled, Let Them Eat Cake. With Nancy in the kitchen, Thanksgiving and Passover always looked and tasted like something right out of Gourmet magazine. Though my dad can attest that the process of getting the food from Heinen's to the refrigerator to the table could be met with some kvetching, a bit of yelling, a lot of banging pots, and an eventual, "Lou, just let me do it." In recent days, many friends and family have mentioned her cooking and baking when offering their condolences, her pies most frequently brought up. I am so grateful that I did learn how to make pie crust just like she did. My pies never look as pretty as Nancy's, though when I would send her pictures of my efforts, she always said they looked great. But they definitely taste just as good as hers. For anyone who would like to learn, I will gladly share her recipe. I have shed many, many tears in the past few days, and I will shed many more in the days, weeks, months, and years to come as I miss and remember my mom. But there has also been so much happiness as I miss and remember her, so much gladness as I hear friends and family talk about how special she was to them. Grief is not linear. There will be moments of weeping. There will be moments of joy. But perhaps the best are those moments of tears and laughter, of laughter and tears together. And now we move from the Bible to the Bard. When Herbie, my mother's father, died when I was 14 years old, my mom read Shakespeare's Sonnet 30 at his funeral. The previous school year, my English teacher had tasked us with memorizing a Shakespearean sonnet of our choice. Naturally, Nancy had an opinion about the assignment and insisted, that I memorize number 30, her favorite. Within the sonnet, an unknown narrator reflects on sad memories of a dear friend. He grieves of his shortcomings and failures, while also remembering happier moments. The night before the funeral, I told my mom that if she did not feel like she could get through reading the sonnet, I would be able to step in her place. She, of course, read it beautifully, but she was so proud that at such a young age, I had already become proficient in the words of Shakespeare and felt comfortable and confident performing them. For years, I have known that when this day would eventually come, I would be tasked with reading Sonnet 30 at my mother's funeral. Nora has not yet mastered her first word, let alone iambic pentameter, so I am on my own today. Although a huge thank you to my dear friend Carolyn Oliver, who could not be here in person today, but sent me a recording of the sonnet, of her reading the sonnet, just in case I needed a backup. I hope I can make it all the way through and read it as beautifully as my mom did. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought, I summon up remembrance of things past. I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye unused to flow, for precious friends hid in death's dateless night, and weep afresh love's long since cancelled woe, and moan the expense of many vanished sight. Then can I grieve at grievances foregone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of fore bemoaned moan, which I knew pay as if never paid before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored, and sorrows end.
Thank you for those exquisite recollections of an outstanding woman. Please rise.
מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, עם קדושים וטהורים, כי זו רקיע מזהירים את נשמת נחנה אסתר בת חוני ואהבה שהלכה לעולמה. בעל הרחמים יסתיריה בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרו חיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Nancy Klein, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
soul. Guides me in straight paths for the sake of his name. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy